Welcome back to Cinema Flicks and Music Picks. I'm Dave, your host with the most, the beast with the least. Least we can do this evening is play catch up in Jimmy Stewart's It's a Wonderful Month. So, if you missed the video yesterday, where I said I was doing this, it occurred to me there are a few themes that I could make into a twofer and upload them on a Sunday, where it would be one video, two films, make them a bit shorter, and there would be a linking aspect. So the linking aspect of today is that they are both films starring James Stewart, of course, and also the incomparable Marlene Dietrich. So we shall start with 1939's Destry Rides Again, a comic western which is quite influential in its way. Jimmy is still playing that very much oh shucks type. His name is Thomas Jefferson Destry, so you can almost imagine he may be an ancestor of Jefferson Smith, and there might have been a marriage involved, changing the surname at some point. But ostensibly the plot of this is quite simple. The town is an absolute nut house, insane. It starts with basically the ending of Blazing Saddles, where there's a massive fight for no particular reason, hundreds of extras just throwing themselves through windows, horses riding into saloons and back out again, beans farting, Gene Wilder, everything's going on. It's crazy. And this town, we quickly learn, is pretty much owned and controlled by this faction who are ostensibly cowboys, because the cowboys, as we know them as, or that's just the stars of the westerns, but the cowboys were actually the name of a particular band of outlaws. So this town, wonderfully called Bottleneck, is overrun by these cowboys who own the gambling. They trick people into losing their land. They're trying to run an operation where they'll own the land so they can charge a levy for people doing the cattle droves over the land, and it'll be a money making machine for years to come, that kind of thing. And the bar where most of the action takes place actually is where they kind of make their office. And they're, if you want to call them gangsters, their gangster's mole is Frenchie, as played by Marlene Dietrich. So this is Marlene towards the end of her real stardom. She'd made the films with Joseph von Sternberg, the wonderful films with Joseph von Sternberg, and we're approaching 1939. Of course, World War II would break out, and she would become a major asset in the war years for America, because to have a massively famous German be on your side and say how terrible the forces of Germany were was quite the asset. So Marlene would be a propaganda tool who was very useful in the next few years. But her film career, as we've seen a million times, unfortunately, when the war was over, a bit like when sound pictures started, cinema audiences wanted a kind of fresh slate. They wanted new stars. They wanted, things had to be altered. And Hollywood isn't always nice to actresses who are the wrong side of 40, is it? So, and likewise, Jimmy Stewart, of course, would play a massive part in the war, where he legitimately had one of the most dangerous careers you could possibly have. With flying daytime bombing missions, but we'll go into that another time. This is one of the last films where you really get to see Jimmy Stewart play the pure oh shucks persona. So we're right in the peak era of Capra here. So he's done You Can't Take It With You, and he's filmed but not quite released Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He's about to do the Philadelphia Story, but he's even a little bit more cynical in that. But at this point, he's still very much the nice guy. So He is called upon because his father was a famous sheriff, and he's the son, he's Destry Jr., and the new sheriff of Shinbone, that's the one from Liberty Valance. The new sheriff of Bottleneck is the town drunk. That's how seriously the mayor takes it, because he's in the pocket of the cowboys. And he just appoints the town drunk. But the town drunk used to know a real gunslinger, Destry, a man of real honour. And he's long dead, but Jimmy Stewart's his son. So he calls on old Jimbo to come to the rescue and hopefully help him clean up Bottleneck, because what they consider a washed up old drunk sheriff used to be quite the lawman himself. So it's a bit of a redemption story for our sheriff as well. Jimmy turns up and is a bit of a laughing stock. You know, he comes out the carriage holding the traveller he's with. He's holding her parasol and, you know, canary, and everybody laughs at him. But he's very happy to be mocked. He can take that. That's a very small price to pay for peace. And he is confronted, and the leader of the cowboys tells him he takes great pleasure in collecting deputies' guns, to which Jimmy Stewart says, well, that'll be a bit difficult, I don't carry guns. Again, cue laughter. So they think this guy's just a real hick, a real nobody, an idiot really, until they see that it does a little stunt outside. They are shooting up, these cowboys are shooting up the place, just, you know, the way they do in westerns, where they shoot in the sky for no real reason. Bullets must have been hella cheap back then. And Jimmy, you know, now he's the deputy, tells him, you know, stop, you know, takes the gun off and says, you know, you don't have to do silly things with these. Look, you can play games as well. Look at those 5 little wooden pegs on top of that building there. Takes them out with ease. So they suddenly realise, maybe Destry doesn't carry a gun, but he can certainly handle one. So we set up that interesting dichotomy from then. There's a hell of a cat fight between Marlene and one of the locals' wives. She takes great pleasure in betting with him, where she bets $30 against his trousers. She wins. And there's a big cat fight, which Jimmy ends by throwing a bucket of water over the two of them. So I'm not going to go into too much more of the plot, because that's really your setup. That's all the pawns in place. Suffice to say, they have a lot of friction. She's working for the bad guys, but he sees something good in her because that's how he's inclined to be. Can she be trusted? It's a joyous little film. It's a gem of a western. It's hilarious in places. I mean, the cat fight's absolutely hilarious. Jimmy tells a great joke about an orphan at one point. If anybody's a Doctor Who fan who watches, he's very almost like the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton. He uses the idea of other people thinking he's a fool to his advantage. So he's perfectly content for people to think he's a fool, knowing that he isn't. So he always keeps that ace up his sleeve. But he's not deceiving anybody with it. He's a genuinely nice guy, and he does believe in law and order. And it's not quite as forceful as Liberty Valance was last week. He's much more meek and humble than anything in that film, because we are still in 1939 as well, so we are reasonably early still. We're still in the first decade of talkies, really. That's something that comes across in the acting of the bit part players, but nonetheless, if I do have a complaint about this film, it's that it takes a really, really sudden tone twist in the last 10 minutes, where it goes from romp comedy, slightly comedic western, to something you'd imagine John Wayne in. So, you know, it takes too sudden a turn, and I think if this film was made later, it would have been more along the lines of something like a Cat Ballou with Lee Marvin, that kind of thing. It's still a great movie, it's still absolutely worth checking out, but the conventions of the time says it has to lean into melodrama for the last 10 minutes to appeal to a certain audience, you know, because that's just, you know, you can't have a fully comic western in 1939, it still has to adhere to some of the tropes. So, you know, things are added which don't really help it as a cohesive whole. But it's very much imitated pretty much any comedic western you can imagine, including the ones like Bob Hope and things, you know, all those kind of ones, Buttons and Bows, all that stuff. You can imagine took inspiration from this. And it's been remade as well as late as something like was the one in 1960. There's a radio version included on this Criterion version with Joan Blondell playing Frenchie, and even the idea that she's called Frenchie, Joan Crawford in Johnny Guitar was called Vienna. So, you know, there's even something there, I think. You know, there's you know, not copying, but there's certainly variations on a theme in places. And although I'm not 100% satisfied with the way the characters develop in the last 10 minutes, I still think it's true to them as people. It just wasn't fleshed out enough to take such a sudden twist. But that's 1939. We can't really expect it to, you know. It's one of those, it's the era of where films end, you know, they barely get the last sentence out before the end comes up, because they've got to get the next, you know, crowd in things, and they've already had the B-movie and the cartoon and the newsreel and things. So it's a fantastic film. I'm probably preaching to the choir because this is a famous movie, but if you ain't seen Destry Rides Again, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And Jimmy's on full charm mode here. This is just, yeah, it's up there with, if not in performance, then just in pure charisma and charm. It's up there with George Bailey. It's up there with Elwood Dowd, and we will be doing Harvey, by the way, don't worry. It's up there with Jefferson Smith. It's one of his great characters, one of his most likeable characters, and one of his most likeable movies. I just think you could have had an extra 10 minutes if it was made a few years later, post-war perhaps, and really fleshed out and given it a bit more conviction. However, as it is, still recommended. Still recommended. Go tell the boys in the back room. Yes, Marlene sings quite a few numbers in this. So, 11 years later, we've had the war. I wasn't there myself, but here things got a little bit out of hand, to say the least. Horrible time. Suffering all over the world. The cinema, as if that's important compared to things like the Holocaust, for goodness sake, but cinema would be irrecoverably changed because of it. And again, different types of stories were being made post-war. Jimmy had jumped into making darker films, like we saw last week with Rope, and he'd already made Winchester by the time this next movie came out. He'd already made Call Northside, so you know he's already exploring the darker side of his personality. He's kind of clicked that, you know, maybe it's time to put away the childish things, and you know it's a bit passé to be the, you know, the white hats versus the black hats in this day and age. So Jimmy, and I got this in a German box set from Germany. It's where most good German things come from. Made a film, again with Marlene, another great thing to come from Germany. And this is No Highway in the Sky, or to give it its German title, Die Reise ins Ungewisse. Please, anyone who speaks German, tell me, did I get that even remotely right? I always think if you just say things with conviction, you can't really go wrong. Just jump in. Yeah. So again, you can even see here, you know, look at the difference in age and just the illustration of Jimmy. You know, it's only 11 years, but he's gone from, you know, boyish charm to, you know, middle-aged man. You know, you can see the difference there, 11 years. Whereas Marlene is still being painted as the vamp, but that's Marlene Dietrich. She would she would keep that persona up until the 1970s when she was out on tour, and you know, and then she became a recluse and things because she didn't want people to see her becoming really old. So this is the story of Jimmy Stewart's a scientist, a boffin as they refer to him, and he works in for British aviation. They don't want to use British Airways because, you know, sued. And they're making a new type of airplane, and one has recently crashed, the Reindeer. And Jimmy Stewart has done the maths. He's an insatiable maths believer. The numbers tell him everything. His daughter, played by a very young Jeanette Scott from Day of the Triffids and a million other great movies. When you meet her, she's exactly the same. They play games about mathematical equations of the pyramids and things. It's quite wonderful. But he has determined precisely when this aircraft will give way. It's got a very distinctive tail with kind of, is there a picture on it? No, there isn't. For some, even the back doesn't have it. That's quite odd considering it's such an integral part of the film. But it's got a very distinctive tail on the plane, and he determines that to within a couple of hours of his mathematical equation, this is when the plane will come down. It's like 1,440 hours, something like that. And there's recently been a crash in Canada, and it was one of these planes, and he checks the manifest, and it's within 10 hours or something of his equation. So he 100% believes that this is now the fate of this aircraft. It talks about nuclear fission, and it intentionally goes over your head. I think some of it was kind of made up because they start talking about things that aren't really to do with anything. You know, they start talking about nuclear fission and things that aren't really, you know. but they kind of throw enough science babble at you that you just go along with it. Really, you do it anyway because it's Jimmy Stewart telling you, so you kind of believe it. But he determines, again, this has to happen because the numbers say it must happen. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes. It has happened in Canada. So the airlines say, okay, we'll send you over to Canada and you can investigate it. You can determine if that's what happened. We didn't find the tail, but you can have a look and see if you can find it or if there's any other clues. And he says, no problem, and goes over. First of all, though, there's some really weird far stuff with Jack Hawkins, a mainstay of British cinema, and I do love Jack Hawkins, and he's fine here. But he visits Jimmy. He's kind of his boss at British Aviation, and he visits Jimmy. And they're going a bit too far with the whole absent-minded professor kind of thing. Jimmy is he forgets, for example, that it's his house, and Jack Hawkins is visiting him. So instead of asking Jack Hawkins to leave, Jimmy tries to leave his own house. I mean, and he's been in the house for 11 years, but he still goes to the neighbour's house and tries to let him in every night. You know, they're doing a bit too much to make him eccentric. I think that's not terribly subtle in this film, but again, it's quite charming because Jimmy's able to play that kind of stuff any day. Jack Hawkins is a wonderful straight man for that kind of thing. So it would be jarring on paper, but the actors just make it work. And Jeanette Scott's wonderful as the very Wednesday Addams-like daughter. You know, she's very straight-laced and very, very cold, because she's been raised that way in a house of mathematics after her mother was killed by a B-2 bomber in the war. Again, war really is one of the kind of themes that separate these two films and makes 11 years seem like 50 in a way. So Jimmy's on the flight to go over to Canada and determine what's happened, when, wouldn't you know, it turns out that he's also on one of these planes. He's on a reindeer. And he is offered the chance to go up front and speak to the captain, because they say we've got a VIP on board who, you know, designs planes, so we should probably let him have a look around and blah blah blah. And Jimmy says, how many hours is this plane logged? It turns out it's just about 1440. So he's convinced that this plane is going to crash. Marlene Dietrich's the co-passenger, where she basically plays Marlene Dietrich, or an idealised version of her. She's a world famous actress who's very considerate and kind and decent, but glamorous, and everybody loves her, and she's never done anything wrong. And she didn't have an affair with every man, woman, and, well, I was going to say child, but no, she didn't have an affair with any children in real life. No, sorry Marlene. But she is a very idyllic version of the real Marlene Dietrich. She's a fascinating character. I've read a few books about her, and she's a very interesting person. On the plane, Jimmy meets Glynis Barber, who would also play his wife later on in a movie. What one was that? Was that Mr. Hobbs Takes a Vacation? Take Her, She's Mine? It was one of his kind of fluffy 60s ones. We may cover that, who knows? And she's the air hostess, basically, and, you know, they start to believe his story because he's so plausible and so authentic. But they do make it to Canada, and they land. They're not all the way there to their destination yet. They're still going to go on the next hop. So the refuel at the kind of touchdown once they reach the first part of the States, like Nova Scotia or whatever, and then they're going to hop the rest over to Montreal. And at this point, Jimmy sabotages the plane because he's so convinced that that it's going to kill everybody on board, and he's doing it for, to quote Hot Fuzz, the greater good. Again, I've got quite a few problems with the last 20 minutes of this film. Really, the plot that I just told you there is the first 50 minutes of the movie, and the next half hour are this incredibly badly paced investigation into what he did, where his bosses all seem to believe him. It's only the civil servants above them that are trying to say that he's a crackpot. So there's no real jeopardy. We found out he's got money in the bank, so again, there's no real jeopardy there. For some reason, he's made such a great connection with these two in the space of one flight. The Marlene Dietrich flies from Hollywood to just come and give gifts to his daughter, while Glynis Johns moves in with the daughter while he's, gallivanting around, and becomes the new mum. That was a whirlwind romance. But it's missing something, which it really is the fact that they've had to shoehorn in two relationships here. Marlene Dietrich gives the film star quality. Of course, she's one of the great stars of Hollywood of all time. But for the plot, she's not really necessary. You could actually do this. But you can't have Marlene just play that role, because nobody in the world is going to buy Marlene Dietrich as a humble air hostess in 1950. Nobody's going to buy that. So you have to create this glamorous character, and she's a great name for the marquee. And I'm not putting Marlene Dietrich down. I love her a bit. She's a fantastic presence in this film. She's got great chemistry with Jimmy Stewart. And if anything, do you know what film it reminded me of? Steven Spielberg's Sully. You know that film about Captain Sullivan who landed the ship in the Hudson? And how the second half of the film is really an investigation into Sully's actions and what he did. It's kind of like that. And there's no way Steven Spielberg wouldn't have seen this, because, a baby boomer film fan, yeah, I think he would have seen a film starring Marlene Dietrich and Jimmy Stewart. what Sully got right and this doesn't is it builds the tension in the relationships between people, and it gives you a real idea of how it's affecting them personally. Whereas in this, Jimmy Stewart doesn't really mind being the fall guy. Marlene Dietrich, she'll solve everything because she's a major film star, and Glynis Johns is all in on just marrying Jimmy Stewart anyway. So, there's no real stakes. The stakes ultimately are, will they ground the fleet of these planes? So he will be saving future lives, but really it would just be one more crash. We've already had one, so one more would prove him right anyway. Not that I'm saying that, it would only kill another 50 people, and then he'd be justified. That's a bit nasty of me. But essentially he would be justified anyway, even if he didn't do anything soon enough. Yes, there would be people dead, but they would be crawling back to him, and he would be vindicated. But we never see the next flight. I mean, there's not there's a plane taking off in 20 minutes from Stansted, and he has to, convince the transport minister to stop it before. There's no race against time element. There's nothing like that. And it all concludes in just a very British, everybody talks like this. I mean, Jack Hawkins is the most working class guy in the bloody movie, for goodness sake, apart from the Americans in the gym. Everybody's got a pipe and they're going, send him in. What's all this I hear about you and these planes? Why don't you explain yourself? And everybody talks slightly like these old BBC broadcasters. This is London calling all the ships at sea. Everybody's got a wonderful, old-fashioned British Broadcasting Corporation voice. That very received pronunciation. And I guess that's true because we're talking about the guys who were the head of the equivalent of BA. So they were all Sir this and Sir that, and it was all jobs for the boys. So it works. But again, there just needs to be a bit more tension. So I like that not only did we manage to find a theme that links these in terms of Marlene Dietrich being the co-star, but also two films that need 5 or 10 more minutes to really get them from good watches, entertaining movies, to classics. Although I think this is a classic anyway, it's just the last couple of minutes, things just escalate too fast. But this especially needs more stakes. This needs to build its stakes more carefully. That's the kind of equivalence that I draw here. So really both have third act problems, but both are fun watches. Jimmy Stewart oozes charisma in both. Marlene Dietrich oozes Marlene Dietrichness in both. And I would recommend seeing them both ultimately because they don't make them like that anymore, and it's cool to see this Imagine the Plane. It's actually a really cool looking plane, even to this day. It's got that kind of 1950s design, like something out of The Day the Earth Stood Still or something. You expect Klaatu to come out from it. It's kind of wonderful. So that's the twofer for you. There'll be another one next Sunday, and we'll be back tomorrow, Monday, with another Jimmy Stewart movie. And I don't want to spoil things in terms of what's definitely coming up, but next Monday is my birthday, so it's going to be my all-time favourite movie we're covering. And if any of you know me, let's just say hello, Harvey. Next Monday. And because about 5 people have asked for it, I didn't know it was that popular, we're kind of going to cover another movie that involves aviation in quite a tragic way. We will be looking at the Glenn Miller story, and we will be doing another Hitchcock, and we will be doing a couple more Anthony Mann, so don't worry, we're not after Mr. Kruger's Christmas. I think you deserve a few big hitters for a couple of days, so I'll pull something out of the vault. Listen, we're about to hit the half hour mark, but that's quite good for 2 movies. I think that's not too bad, so thanks very much for your patience. Any particular films you want covered, I can't promise I can get to them all, but stick them in the comments, folks. You know, some of you already have, and it's been great to bring you along the journey. Some of you have said you're going to check out some of the films, which is really cool. So thank you very much for that. And to all new subscribers, if you are tuning in, then hello. I'd imagine they're more in the Neil Young videos, some of the ones I've picked up, but hey. It only remains to say, do me a favour. Just be careful out there, huh? For me. Love and mercy, my dears. Love and mercy.